The air was crisp, with the scent of pine and roasted chestnuts, as Jacob Miles parked his rusting truck along the main street of his hometown. It had been years since he'd driven down these familiar roads, but everything seemed smaller now. The towering evergreens lining the boulevard, the quaint storefronts decorated with twinkling lights, and the Christmas parade banners fluttering in the breeze brought a bittersweet sense of nostalgia. "Daddy, look at that!" Jacob's 10-year-old daughter, Lily, pointed excitedly at a towering float shaped like a gingerbread house. A group of volunteers added the finishing touches, attaching oversized candy canes to its roof. "It's just like the ones we used to see when I was your age," Jacob said, smiling down at Lily, who clutched his gloved hand tightly. This parade was more than a holiday tradition. It was a reminder of better times. After years of deployment overseas, this was the first Christmas he'd be spending at home, free to create memories with his daughter. They made their way through the crowd gathering along the sidewalks. Families wrapped in scarves and hats waved to friends, their laughter mingling with the cheery notes of a brass band warming up in the distance. Vendors pushed carts of steaming hot cocoa and fresh kettle corn, the smells wafting through the icy air. "Do you think they'll have Santa on the fire truck like you told me about?" Lily asked, her brown eyes wide with anticipation. "Of course," Jacob said with a grin. "Santa's the grand finale. We've got to stick around until the end to see him." The parade started with a burst of energy. Marching bands from local high schools played festive tunes, their brass instruments gleaming under the winter sun. Cheerleaders twirled batons, and a troop of children dressed as elves tossed candy to the eager crowd. Jacob found himself explaining every float to Lily, recounting stories of how he'd once marched in the parade as a kid. As the parade continued, Jacob noticed a rumble growing louder. He turned toward the sound, just as a group of bikers roared onto the scene, their motorcycles breaking through the merry atmosphere like a storm cloud on a sunny day. Dressed in leather jackets adorned with menacing insignias, the gang's presence was impossible to ignore. "Stay close to me," Jacob said, pulling Lily behind him. The bikers slowed their engines, revving loudly enough to drown out the music. Parade goers shifted uncomfortably, and parents instinctively held their children tighter. One of the bikers, a man with a towering build and a thick beard streaked with gray, dismounted his bike and strutted toward the crowd. "Nice little show you got here," the man sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. "Mind if we join the fun?" Jacob's jaw tightened. He recognized the man immediately. Razor, the self-proclaimed leader of the gang, infamous for causing trouble in the town. Razor's eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on Jacob. "Well, well, if it isn't the town's golden boy back from playing soldier," Razor said, his lips curling into a cruel smile. "You gonna save the day, Sergeant, or are you just here to collect a few candy canes?" Jacob met Razor's gaze, but said nothing, unwilling to escalate the situation. The years had taught him that words alone rarely de-escalated someone like Razor. "Daddy, who is he?" Lily whispered, clutching his hand tighter. "Just someone who doesn't know how to enjoy Christmas," Jacob replied softly, his tone calm but firm. Razor chuckled darkly. "What's the matter? Got nothing to say? I figured a big hero like you would have some inspiring speech prepared." "Let's just let the parade continue," Jacob said, his voice measured. "No one wants trouble today." But Razor wasn't interested in peace. He stepped closer, invading Jacob's space. "Trouble? You think I'm the trouble?" he said, his voice rising. "I'm just here to make sure everyone remembers who runs this town." The crowd around them grew tense, with whispers rippling through the air. The festive spirit dimmed as Razor's gang revved their engines, creating an oppressive noise that seemed to vibrate through the bones of every onlooker. A nearby float, carrying a group of elderly veterans dressed in their uniforms, came to an abrupt halt. The veterans looked on with wary eyes, their hands twitching toward their sides as if instinctively searching for tools of defense. "Let's move along, folks," Razor shouted, addressing the crowd. "Don't mind us. We're just here to spread a little holiday cheer." The crowd didn't budge, their fear holding them rooted to the spot. Jacob glanced down at Lily, who was trembling despite the thick coat she wore. "All right, that's enough," Jacob said, stepping forward. "You've made your point, Razor. Why don't you let these people enjoy their day?" Razor tilted his head, a smirk playing on his lips. And what are you going to do about it, soldier boy? The taunt hung in the air like a challenge, daring Jacob to react. He didn't flinch, his years of military discipline keeping his emotions in check. I'm asking you nicely, Jacob said, his voice steady but firm. Walk away. For a moment, Razor hesitated, as if calculating whether Jacob was worth the trouble. But then he laughed, a loud, derisive sound that echoed down the street. Nice try, Razor said, leaning closer, but this is my parade now. Jacob clenched his fists at his sides, his instincts screaming at him to act, but his priority was Lily. He took a deep breath, silently hoping the police would intervene before things got worse. Just then, Lily tugged on his sleeve. Daddy, I'm scared, she whispered. Jacob crouched down to her level, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. It's going to be okay, he said, looking into her eyes. I promise. Razor, noticing the tender moment, sneered. What's the matter, little girl? Scared your dad can't protect you? That was the final straw. Jacob stood up, his calm demeanor hardening into resolve. Leave, now, he said, his voice carrying a weight that made even Razor falter. But Razor wasn't ready to back down. Not yet. Or what? He challenged, stepping closer. Before Jacob could respond, the sound of a whistle cut through the tension. A police officer approached, his hand resting on the holster of his weapon. All right, break it up, the officer commanded. This parade is a family event. Take your gang and leave, or we'll escort you out. Razor glared at the officer but didn't argue. With a snap of his fingers, he signaled to his gang, and they reluctantly began to move back to their bikes. As Razor mounted his motorcycle, he cast one last glance at Jacob. This isn't over, soldier, he said, his voice low and menacing. Jacob didn't respond, his focus now entirely on Lily, who clung to his side. As the bikers roared away, the crowd let out a collective sigh of relief, and the parade resumed its joyful march. But Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that Razor's parting words were a promise, and that the day was far from over. The warmth of the parade returned slowly, like embers rekindling after a gust of wind. Jacob tried to focus on the festive floats and Lily's innocent excitement, but Razor's sneer haunted him. The bikers might have left for now, but Jacob knew their kind. People like Razor didn't let things go easily. Daddy, are they coming back? Lily asked, her small hand still gripping his. Jacob crouched down and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. No, sweetheart, he said, forcing a smile. They're just bullies. We don't need to worry about them. But you were so brave, she said, her voice tinged with awe. Jacob kissed her forehead. Brave is just doing what's right, even when it's scary. The sound of jingle bells brought their attention back to the parade. A float designed like a giant toy workshop rolled by, with volunteers tossing candy to the children. Lily seemed to relax, laughing as she caught a peppermint and offered it to Jacob. They walked a little further down the street, finding a cozy spot near a popcorn vendor. The aroma of butter and salt filled the air, mingling with the distant hum of holiday music. Jacob knelt beside Lily to take a picture in front of the next float, capturing her radiant smile. But as Jacob stood to pocket his phone, the sharp growl of engines shattered the peace again. His chest tightened as the gang returned, more bikers than before, their leather-clad figures cutting through the festive atmosphere like a knife. Razor led the group, his face twisted in a smug grin. Didn't think I'd let you off that easy, did you, soldier? Razor called, his voice booming over the noise of the engines. The crowd's cheerfulness turned to unease. Parents whispered to one another, pulling their children closer. Jacob's body went rigid, instinctively placing himself between Lily and the bikers. Just ignore them, Jacob muttered under his breath, trying to calm his racing thoughts. Razor wasn't content with being ignored. He dismounted his bike, swaggering toward Jacob with the arrogance of someone used to getting his way. The gang followed, parking their motorcycles in a line that blocked the path of the floats. Thought you'd look tougher, seeing as you're some big-shot soldier, Razor sneered. He gestured to the gang, drawing laughter from the group. But here you are, hiding behind a little girl. Jacob's fists clenched at his sides, but he forced himself to take a deep breath. This is a family event. Take your gang and go, he said firmly. Or what? Razor asked, stepping closer. You gonna call for backup? Oh, wait, you don't have your squad anymore, do you? Jacob didn't rise to the bait. He glanced around, noticing that the police were farther down the street, dealing with another section of the parade. They wouldn't get here in time if things escalated. Listen, Jacob said, lowering his voice to a tone Razor might mistake for submission. These people don't deserve this. Just leave. Razor smirked, clearly enjoying the crowd's nervous energy. Why don't you make me, tough guy? Jacob stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. Last chance, Razor. Walk away. Razor laughed, but his eyes narrowed. He lunged suddenly, shoving Jacob hard enough to make him stumble. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and Lily let out a frightened cry. Daddy! Jacob straightened, steadying himself. He locked eyes with Razor, his calm exterior now laced with steel. You don't want to do this. Razor's grin widened as he stepped closer. Oh, I think I do, he said, throwing a punch aimed at Jacob's face. The years of training kicked in automatically. Jacob sidestepped the blow, grabbing Razor's wrist and twisting it downward in one fluid motion. Razor yelped in pain as Jacob pushed him back, releasing him with precision before things escalated further. The crowd erupted in cheers, and Razor's gang shifted uneasily, clearly not expecting Jacob to handle their leader so easily. You want to keep embarrassing yourself, or are we done here? Jacob asked, his voice low but steady. Razor's face darkened with anger. Get him, he barked. The gang moved as one, surrounding Jacob. Lily screamed, and Jacob motioned for her to run toward a nearby vendor. Stay there, Lily. I'll handle this. Before the bikers could make their move, a commanding voice cut through the tension. Stand down. Jacob turned to see the veterans from the earlier float stepping forward. Men and women of various ages, each wearing remnants of their uniforms or medals, formed a line behind Jacob. One of the veterans, a grizzled man with a Marine Corps patch on his jacket, stepped up beside Jacob. We don't take kindly to bullies ruining Christmas, he said, his voice firm. The crowd cheered again, emboldened by the sight of the veterans standing shoulder to shoulder. Razor's bravado faltered as he realized the odds were no longer in his favor. You really want to do this in front of a crowd? Jacob asked, his tone sharp. Because I promise you, it won't end well. Razor hesitated, his gaze flickering between Jacob and the veterans. But his pride wouldn't let him back down. With a growl, he lunged again, this time pulling a knife from his belt. Jacob reacted instantly, his military training guiding his movements. He caught Razor's wrist mid-swing, twisting it until the knife clattered to the ground. In the same motion, Jacob used Razor's momentum to throw him to the pavement, pinning him effortlessly. The crowd erupted into applause as Razor struggled beneath Jacob's grip. The bikers who had circled Jacob earlier now hesitated, clearly unsure whether they wanted to face the same fate. Enough, shouted the Marine veteran. Take your bikes and get out of here before you end up like your fearless leader. Most of the gang didn't need to be told twice. One by one, they revved their engines and sped off, leaving Razor behind. Jacob stood, letting Razor scramble to his feet. Go home, Razor, he said coldly. Humiliated and outnumbered, Razor spat at the ground and stormed toward his bike. This isn't over, he muttered, before speeding off into the distance. Jacob turned to find Lily running toward him. She threw her arms around his waist, tears streaming down her face. You're okay, she cried. I told you I would be, Jacob said, hugging her tightly. The Marine clapped Jacob on the shoulder. You handled yourself well, son. Good to know there are still men like you around. Jacob nodded. Thanks for stepping in. I couldn't let them ruin the day for everyone. As the parade resumed, the crowd's cheers and applause followed Jacob and the veterans. The festive spirit had been shaken, but not broken. But Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that Razor's parting words were a promise of more trouble to come. The calm that followed Razor's retreat was short-lived. Though the parade continued and the crowd tried to move past the disruption, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. His years in the military had sharpened his instincts, and now those instincts screamed at him to stay alert. Lily clung to Jacob's side as they walked toward a booth, handing out free hot chocolate. The warm drink seemed to calm her, and she smiled faintly as she sipped. But Jacob remained on edge, his eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of Razor or his gang. The Marine veteran, whose name was revealed to be Hank, approached Jacob again. You've got good instincts, Hank said, nodding toward Jacob's protective stance near Lily. But I'd bet my pension raiser isn't done with you. I was thinking the same, Jacob admitted. Hank's eyes narrowed. We've got your back if they try anything. Most of us are still sharper than we look. He gestured to the other veterans, who nodded in agreement. Jacob appreciated the support, but didn't want to drag anyone else into danger. I'll handle it if it comes to that, he said. But thanks. As the evening wore on, the parade reached its climax with a grand float featuring Santa Claus and a sleigh pulled by real reindeer. Lily's earlier fears seemed to fade as she cheered and waved at Santa, her joy bringing a rare moment of peace to Jacob. That peace was shattered when the sound of engines roared back to life. Jacob's heart sank as Razor and his gang returned, their numbers even larger now. The bikers didn't bother hiding their intentions this time, revving their engines loudly as they advanced on the parade route. Stay with Lily, Jacob told Hank, his voice firm. Get her somewhere safe. Hank hesitated but nodded, taking Lily by the hand. Come on, kiddo. Let's go see Santa up close. Daddy, Lily cried, trying to pull away. It's okay, Lily, Jacob reassured her. I'll be right behind you. Go with Hank. Lily's tearful gaze lingered on Jacob, but she let Hank lead her away as Jacob stepped forward to face Razor once again. The bikers spread out, intimidating parade-goers and blocking the floats. Razor dismounted his bike and strode toward Jacob, his expression a mix of anger and smugness. You made me look like a fool earlier, Razor snarled. Now you're going to pay for it. Jacob didn't flinch. You're the one ruining Christmas for these people. Walk away before you make things worse for yourself. Razor laughed darkly. Big words for a guy who's outnumbered. I wouldn't be so sure about that, came Hank's voice. Jacob turned to see the veterans from the earlier float stepping forward once more, joined now by other members of the community. Fathers, mothers, and even teenagers rallied around Jacob, their collective presence forming a formidable line against Razor's gang. Razor's confidence wavered for a moment, but he quickly masked it with bravado. You think this changes anything? He sneered. We'll take all of you. Jacob stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of a seasoned leader. Last warning, Razor. Leave now. Razor ignored him, lunging with a wild swing. Jacob sidestepped easily, delivering a controlled strike to Razor's midsection that sent him staggering. The crowd erupted in cheers as Jacob stood tall, his military training once again proving its worth. The rest of Razor's gang surged forward, but the veterans and community members were ready. The ensuing clash was chaotic but controlled, with Jacob and the veterans using their training to neutralize the bikers without unnecessary violence. Hank proved to be a force of nature, disarming one biker with a swift move and incapacitating another with a well-placed elbow. The other veterans followed suit, their teamwork and discipline outmatching the bikers' brute force. Jacob stayed focused, keeping Razor in his sights. The gang leader tried to attack again, but Jacob caught his arm and twisted him into a hold that left him immobilized. It's over, Razor, Jacob said firmly. The sound of sirens finally broke through the chaos as the police arrived in force. Officers swarmed the scene, detaining Razor and the remaining bikers who hadn't fled. As Razor was led away in handcuffs, he glared at Jacob. This isn't over, he spat. Jacob shook his head. For your sake, I hope it is. The aftermath of the confrontation left the parade in disarray, but the community's spirit remained unbroken. The crowd cheered and applauded Jacob and the veterans, their gratitude evident in every handshake and pat on the back. Lily ran to Jacob, throwing her arms around him. You're the best daddy ever, she said, her voice muffled against his chest. Jacob hugged her tightly, relief washing over him. I told you I'd be okay. Hank approached, his expression one of admiration. You've got guts, kid, and a good heart. If you ever need anything, you've got friends here. Thanks, Hank, Jacob said, shaking his hand. The parade organizers, eager to salvage the event, invited Jacob and Lily to ride on the veterans' float as a gesture of honor. Lily beamed with excitement as she climbed aboard, and Jacob couldn't help but smile at her joy. As the float made its way down the street, the crowd's cheers grew louder. Jacob waved hesitantly at first, but soon relaxed, realizing that this moment wasn't about him. It was about the community coming together in the face of adversity. Later that evening, as the parade wound down, Jacob found himself reflecting on the day's events. He'd come to the parade hoping to create happy memories for Lily, and while the day hadn't gone as planned, it had become something even more meaningful. As he tucked Lily into bed that night, she looked up at him with wide, adoring eyes. "Daddy, you're like a real-life superhero." Jacob chuckled softly. "Superheroes wear capes, sweetheart. I'm just a dad trying to do what's right." "But you're my superhero," she insisted, her voice heavy with sleep. Jacob kissed her forehead. "I'll take that." The next morning, as snow gently fell outside their window, Jacob received an unexpected visitor. It was Razor, looking sheepish and unsure of himself. "I'm not here to start trouble," Razor said quickly, his hands raised in surrender. I wanted to say something." Jacob crossed his arms, watching Razor warily. "Go on." Razor hesitated before speaking. "My brother. He was a soldier. Didn't make it back." His voice cracked and he looked away. "I guess I took it out on you. That wasn't right." Jacob studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Grief does strange things to people, but it's never too late to make it right." Razor met Jacob's gaze. "I'm sorry for everything." Jacob extended a hand. "Apology accepted. Now, do something with it." Razor shook his hand, a flicker of gratitude crossing his face. As Razor walked away, Jacob felt a sense of closure. The day had brought challenges, but it had also reminded him of the importance of standing up for what was right, and of the possibility of redemption, even for those who seemed beyond it. That Christmas, Jacob and Lily celebrated not just the holiday, but the strength of their bond and the power of community. It was, truly, a Christmas to remember. Thank you for joining us for this unforgettable story of courage, redemption, and the power of unity. Jacob's story reminds us that one person's bravery can inspire an entire community, and even in the face of danger, hope and kindness can prevail. We hope this tale moved you as much as it moved us. If it did, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your take. Don't forget to hit subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss another inspiring story from Hopeful Horizon. And as always, tell us where you're listening from. Thank you for being a part of our community. Until next time, stay hopeful, stay united, and remember that even small acts of courage can make a big difference.